Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome back Elif Item. Elif runs Item by Item, a training and services company focused on Dynamics 365 finance and operations. And in this case, we are talking all about Dynamics 365 Commerce, which sits right next to finance and operations, sometimes right on top of it. And that's one of the things we are here to talk about. Organizations are adopting commerce in a range of different approaches, either alongside finance and operations, by itself in some cases, and interacting with finance and supply chain management. We talk about some of the latest changes in commerce, what it really looks like today, and what kind of roles are using it, how it's being deployed in the field, and what the training needs are of companies that do choose to deploy commerce in all of these different ways. So let's get going. Okay, hi Elif, welcome to the podcast. Once again, thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
So I'm looking forward to talking today about Dynamics 365 Commerce. It's sort of the evolution of the Dynamics 365 or Dynamics ERP retail story, the latest chapter of it, I guess you'd say, the latest evolution of where that product has arrived at, I guess you'd say. It's something that has always interested me because it has evolved on its own, sort of alongside or in parallel with the Dynamics AX, Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations product. It really speaks to me anyway, when I think about commerce, it speaks to how important that overall industry is to Microsoft. I mean, you can tell that, I think, in a lot of ways, that it's not just about Dynamics. It's a priority for the whole company. But just watching this product evolve, it really is something that you have to keep up to date on, I think, on its own. It's its own sort of area and its own really unique importance to Microsoft. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've been seeing and how you've been working with Dynamics 365 Commerce recently?
Sure. Microsoft has heavily invested into D365 Finance and Operations, which used to be old AX for several years. But they started their investment into retail with AX 2009 version about 10 years ago by acquiring a few ISV solutions. And since then, they expanded the code base to address two key components of full omni-channel solution, which is the ultimate goal for D365 as a product. They started to cover the retail store and the call center experiences together within the product. And as e-commerce became more and more important and predominant around the world, I think Microsoft has realized that it had to fill that gap within D365 rather than relying on ISV solutions or maybe some outside tools. I think for that purpose, Microsoft decided to repurpose their own in-house e-commerce solution, the one that they use for their own Microsoft websites, and incorporate it into the D365 offering. They actually chose not to buy an ISV solution for this purpose or another product. They took what they already had and incorporated into D365. And this is a huge step forward for them because now D365 becomes a single solution that can cover all three main pillars of omni-channel offering, which are the retail stores, call center, and e-commerce. And there's really nothing like this in the market. You have players that specialize on individual parts, the call center piece or the retail stores, or obviously singularly e-commerce. But there's really nobody out there who's tackling this huge challenge of providing an omni-channel solution where the orders can flow between all of these channels instead of being integrated into. And they made it a part of the D365 Finance and Operations, but also as a part of this initiative, they repackaged this omni-channel solution as D365 Commerce, and it can be deployed separately than D365 Finance and Supply Chain solution.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting elements of it to me is how it sort of is based on the finance and supply chain. It shares, I guess you would say, a lot of the capabilities, and it adds a lot of very sophisticated capabilities on top of that. And it, like you said, it has been building up this capability set and the architecture even for quite a few years now. I mean, I think you said it goes back to even AX 2009. I didn't even realize that. I thought it started with AX 2012. But in that time, it's changed. I know architecturally, there have been some key changes over the years, right? And the e-commerce element is really the latest. And that really goes hand in hand with sort of the branding change from retail to commerce. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's correct. Because before, as far as branding, retail, when they came up with retail, it became a part of, at the time, they called the product D365 Finance and Operations. It included finance, supply chain, and retail. Now, they're separating D365 Financial and Operations into two products, which are D365 Finance and D365 Supply Chain. And D365, actually three products really, D365 Finance, D365 Supply Chain, and D365 Retail. But now they have taken that retail piece and extended into e-commerce and added the call center functions to it as well and made it a standalone separate product also. So you have multiple options. One is if you are an existing D365 Finance and Operations customer, and if you want to expand your footprint, you can choose to add retail to it only, or you can choose to add e-commerce to it only. And call center is a part of the supply chain piece anyways. So you have ability to take your existing D365 Finance and Operations instance and add the commerce solution to it. Or if you don't have D365 F&O as your ERP system, you can choose to just implement commerce piece, which can be any of the three sub pieces within the commerce: call center, retail, or commerce. And we are seeing some new customers out there definitely implementing commerce only. And usually these customers are maybe new to the e-commerce world, and they're working with the D365 commerce solution to use this tool to bring up their website for the first time.
I'd love to learn more about your experiences there. I mean, obviously you work with customers of these solutions. You build training, as we've mentioned, and we'll talk a little more about that. But I'm curious, what kind of scenarios are you seeing in which the commerce solution is being deployed? Can you talk a little more about some of the scenarios you're seeing?
Sure. Well, one thing we have to realize is, Microsoft is a newcomer to the e-commerce party. There are a lot of established players in the market. The top players like Demandware, Magento. They were acquired by, Salesforce and Adobe. Obviously, Shopify is a new player in the market, and they're providing solutions to enterprise accounts like with Shopify Plus. But this is very similar the way that Microsoft introduced retail solution at the beginning. When it started, they were not a really strong player in the retail world. But as the time passed, look at where they are right now. They have gained a respectful place in the market and gain lots of customers because customers see this as a great opportunity to add to their existing D365 footprint. In the past, if you were using D365 for your ERP and if you wanted to do retail, you had to buy another solution. Now they don't need to do that. They can just bundle it into their licensing and it's automatically integrated to D365. And I expect e-commerce solution to progress in a similar way as the retail because the functionality is there, especially if you already have D365 as ERP plus retail. Then you're getting into using a commerce tool without having to build an integration, without having to build additional licensing. And it's really a natural extension for the existing D365 retail customers to move their e-commerce platform to D365. But as I mentioned, we're also seeing in new commerce only deployments as well. Currently we are working with a customer who has used D365 retail in their retail stores. They have a different ERP and they're about to go live with commerce. And then the third step is for them to implement D365 as an ERP. So it's an interesting path for them, because naturally you would think that they would do D365FO first and go to retail and then go to commerce. But the business needs require them to go about it this way, and it still works because you don't need to do anything additional or build any additional integrations to make this work. It's definitely the natural progression that Microsoft is hoping the customers to take as well. For the companies that are opening up with their new e-commerce channels, it's much more common for them to really look into Microsoft as maybe a little bit of a tryout. They're doing a lot of pilot sort of projects, and they want to see if it works for this new part of the product. And if it does, then they know that retail and the F&O part is even more established, and that's not going to be as much of a challenge as well.
Those different paths really are interesting. And, I should add, I follow other commerce, sort of e-commerce solutions. I guess you would say some vendors, in disclosure, advertise on our site, and quite a few out there. You've named a few, and there's others as well. My assumption, I guess, to this point in terms of the D365 e-commerce capabilities versus the third parties, for companies adopting the D365 commerce, sort of e-commerce engine, that they would typically tend to be, at least at this point, companies that didn't previously have any sort of sophisticated e-commerce solution in place, companies that are maybe coming to retail sort of as a secondary sort of element of their business, perhaps, or companies that just hadn't had much of a presence yet. And this was a good way to get started with it, as opposed to a company that was really already a sophisticated e-commerce retailer. And those companies, in my view, probably already had made a serious commitment to another vendor. And so the Microsoft solution, they would be looking to maybe gain the other retail related capabilities, especially on the operational side, the in-store, the back office capabilities that have really, like you said, have really evolved and become very strong over the years, and maybe leave the e-commerce behind. So it just really depended on the kind of organization and what their situation was.
Yes. And, the timing of COVID-19, I think, has a huge impact on this too, because if you're a company who did not have an e-commerce presence before, maybe for any reason that you didn't feel the need at that point of time, well, now you need to. There's just, it's a necessity with COVID-19, and the timing of the release of commerce solution by Microsoft really coincided with that. So if you're a smaller company and you're considering going into D365 world, and being into the bundle, joining the bundle of Microsoft, then this is also a great opportunity for you to start a new e-commerce site when you didn't have anything before. I do agree with you. It's going to take a little bit more time for D365 commerce maybe to be heavily implemented in companies who has huge e-commerce presence, but it will get there. Specific example, I will not give the customer's name from my consulting world. We've implemented D365 and AX as ERP, and when that implementation was done, retail was just coming out, and this is a customer that has heavy retail presence. And at that time, they did not want to implement retail. They had a separate retail solution, and we've built an integration for it. But when they have upgraded to D365 last year, they have also replaced all of the stores with D365 retail. So for that particular customer who's also very, very active in the e-commerce world, most likely it will take some more time. The functionality has to be there, and it has to be more robust, and they need to see more implementations. But it's I think bound to happen. The amount of investment Microsoft is making into D365 is significant, and I think the benefits are much bigger than using a separate system. because the solution is built on the same foundation. I think this is the number one reason why omni-channel solution work. You have the single item master, single customer price, one pricing logic that spans across multiple components, the stores, call center, and e-commerce. And this eliminates a lot of additional work and staffing. So as soon as they feel like the product is at a point that can meet to their needs, the customers are going to make that transition. I'm absolutely certain of it.
The other aspect I've been thinking about is just how many sort of elements there are in the business apps roadmap at this point that relate to retail, and where, the e-commerce element fits in, because it really does feel almost like, one piece of sort of this larger commerce puzzle right now, between things that are still very early, like, fraud protection and connected store, which are just reaching sort of general availability, along with, acquisitions that are happening in relation to those. I mean, there's new like computer vision acquisition that just happened. There's, new components being added to the fraud protection, for example. The e-commerce elements are evolving. I think even, the content management that's related to that is also evolving with the commerce product. Along with kind of everything else that goes into, the cloud product, like I mentioned earlier, and you've said it's a fairly broad solution that gets into the financials, gets into operations, storefront, retail, POS, back office, and then all these very complicated elements that are unique to a retail operation with, divisions and regions. And, I've sat in on a couple of presentations over the years, like looking at the architecture of what it takes to sort of build a solution architecture that supports all this. And it's hugely complicated. I mean, far more than what, a traditional ERP is asked to do.
Yes. And the needs of each different channel is, they're so different, because the type of audience and the type of operational aspects are quite different. If you look at in retail and call center groups, they're very operations. They're a large group of users. The turnover is usually very high, and you usually have some sort of a management layer that manages that group of people. Their sophistication as far as understanding the solution and solutions capability is not as high either. In the call center, you tend to have a little bit more experienced people, but, retail stores, as you can see, especially on the, more busy times, they'll be hiring more people, and on the less busy times, they will not have as many people. So not only the product capability that plays into the picture, but also who your audience is. But when you go to e-commerce, it's a completely different sort of audience. It's more back office people. They're more, they're more sophisticated people that has a high capability, because these are the people that have been building websites, making sure that everything is running properly. They're usually a small group of people that you will have to train, and as well as that they'll have to utilize the tool. And then you obviously go into the ERP side, which is the back office people that sets up the foundation, who sets up the products and financial aspects, pricing, strategic decisions, and reporting. Then you're talking about maybe more experienced people that have been with the company for a longer time, and also making sort of decisions that's going to affect all of these other parts of the organization. But I think Microsoft has improved tremendously looking into these audiences separately for different purposes. I think when AX started at the beginning, it was seen as only a tool for the back office people. It was built that way. It was presented that way. But now Microsoft is offering different sort of venues. They offer apps, and obviously the product is in the cloud, and all of these various mediums of presenting D365 to different types of audiences really gives them this sort of flexibility of reaching out to different audiences, and also providing different sort of presence, not only just recording transactions, but giving them opportunity to take actions based on information. Omnichannel opportunities are huge for retail companies, because if you go to a store and if you want to return something that you bought from a website, now this is given. Every consumer expects this. And to build this for three different sort of systems, a separate commerce system, a separate retail system, and a separate inventory system, you have to do lots of work. And, expectations of the consumers have increased. And therefore, I think Microsoft is doing a good job of keeping up with those expectations.
One thing I did want to talk to you a little more about, and you just touched on it, was with all these different roles, I mean, as you're describing them, the first thing I think of is, boy, there are some people who have large groups of users with probably fairly limited use of the various systems and touch points of it. And then you have some people who have, advanced skills, a lot of knowledge and expertise, and very deep use of the system and very detailed sort of access to tools and interfaces. And since you deal with, training so much, what's been your experience there? Is that a challenge with balancing these different kinds of users in this sort of one big system?
Yes, it is a challenge, but I think if you understand your audience and what you're trying to teach them, it can be managed. Like you said, the size of audience is a huge input when we are making decisions about how we want to train learners. Size and the location of the learners play into it. For example, if you take the retail stores, usually you're dealing with a large group of learners, and they're very operational, and scalability is the key because they will be in multiple locations. You want to be able to present the information in a way that can be easily consumed. But the other thing we have to consider is whether or not that experience should be tailored or not. How different the retail store POS experience than the standard POS experience, etc. Then we can look into multiple options. We provide online training for standard D365, so we have to work with our customers a lot of the times to make that sort of analysis so that we provide a more tailored sort of experience to the learners. And we look into whether or not we want to mix online training with some custom content, but then, how much access do we need to provide to the different sort of learners? As I mentioned, another example is the call center learners. They're again a large group, very operational, and similarly to retail stores, we most of the time need to mix online training with some custom content or additional delivery methods to make sure that their specific needs are met. But if you look at e-commerce audience, especially to the people who are going to build the components of the website or the web store, it's a smaller group, and it's more configuration specific, that they need to learn more about how to configure D365 to make the web store work. And in that case, we usually recommend them, for example, to take the online training to lay the foundation, and maybe follow up with some sessions about Q&A, and potentially develop some custom. But again, the audience size is not very large. A lot of the times that just does not make sense. We usually recommend them to create job aids to fill in that gap. And finally, for the back office, this is again a relatively small to medium size of group, and they need to be trained on more basics of D365. And we usually recommend them to take the path of taking online training to lay the foundation, then determine the gaps, whether or not those gaps should be filled in with custom training material for a larger group of audience, or with job aids and one-on-one sessions with a smaller group of audience. So we are looking into multiple inputs into our learner community. Whether you are in same location whether you are in different locations, how standard D365 you're using, or what your expertise level is. And all of these things play into the decision making. And with that, we help our customers. Actually, we do this without any charging anything to our customers. As long as they subscribe to our online training, we help them to determine what these gaps are and how they can fill in. They may ask us to fill in those gaps, and they may choose to do it themselves. But it's important for us to provide them an overall training experience, because training is not only about the materials themselves, that for the learners to feel confident and comfortable in using D365 or any new solution, that they need to have an overall understanding of what the goals and objectives are, and they need to feel seen. So if instead of just giving them just some materials to go over, we are really looking into the training experience as a whole and trying to provide them an experience that will get them there when they go live.
A couple of things I think of as you say that. One is sort of the old, conventional wisdom that companies implementing systems like this never think of training early enough in the process. And I assume that's probably still a common mistake. But the other is just how a couple of those groups, especially to me, seem like they're very underappreciated when it comes to getting them, A, just their jobs in general, but B, use of new systems like this. One is those call center agents just seem to be a perennially like underappreciated role, and but so vital because they're, and likewise the retail sort of storefront employees. And these are the two groups that are in front of customers directly, but can really be underappreciated and sort of deprioritized, it seems like, to a large extent.
Yes, I totally agree. And I'll answer both of those questions because those are the two commonly overlooked areas in training. One of them is, as you mentioned, is not starting early enough at the beginning of the project. Traditionally in D365 implementations, what is expected is the consultants are supposed to train a small group of core team members or group of core team members at the beginning of the project. And then those people are supposed to take on training larger groups as the project goes on. But just like anything else, when you're starting a project, you have so many things that are going on. And a lot of the times this training of the core team members can be, number one, overlooked or cut short. Also, these people are learning D365 for the first time. They're seeing it for the first time. They are probably really great at what they do in the company that they work for, but they don't have yet the D365 knowledge and experience to have this sort of conversations that they need to have with the consultants when the design sessions start. So that's why it's tremendously important, and it will pay in dividend to the projects to invest into training core team members upfront more heavily. The more educated they are, the better decisions they will make. But also, these are the groups of people that are very busy in organizations. There's a reason why they are picked for the core team, because they're good at what they do. They understand the business very well. So you have to give them enough time and flexibility as they're going through training. If you just give them 3 days of training where they have to take this time off from day-to-day jobs, or they have to come to training and do their jobs, you're just not going to get the sort of benefit that you can otherwise. And that's why we always encourage our customers to use online training for this purpose. Give them more time, give them a month, give them 2 months, have them give them ability to be able to utilize the training as they need it, when they need it. And that's where online training, I think, makes a huge difference, because they can utilize the online training in a way that they can really improve their understanding of D365 without having to take huge chunks of time from their daily schedule. And the second piece is, as you mentioned, underappreciated group of people, which are usually the call center people and the storefront employees. And a lot of these people are not taught in training up front, and there's a good reason for that, because these two parts of the implementations require a lot of thinking and configuration during implementation. There's a lot of discussions about how call center process should work, how the calls should be handled, how POS should look, how the process should work for X scenario, Z scenario, Y scenario. And what happens usually is the consultants and the implementation teams are so busy trying to make these parts of the solutions work and work in a way that's accepted all throughout the organization that they are late usually into thinking how training is going to work and how much time we need to train all of the employees on these processes. I see many times that it's like late in the testing phase and still design decisions are being made in these two major functional areas, and the solution is not ready yet to be presented to the learners. So then what happens is you are stuck with really short period of time right before go live to train a large group of people on these processes that you've worked so hard for months. And if you don't do the right sort of investment, then you're just not going to get the benefits from it. And again, here the online training can be very helpful. You can use standard online training or custom online training, quickly creating some custom online training for these parts that are maybe changed based on your company needs. And then what will happen is that you'll be able to present this material quickly to large groups of people instead of trying to get them into some sort of a classroom environment. So both problems have valid reasons, but if you know the reason and if you know that it's actually coming your way, then you can take extra steps to deal with it and make sure that your training is more successful, much more successful than it would have been if you hadn't thought about these challenges.
That's a blind spot or a mistake that I've been hearing about forever. That risk that gets introduced into projects with sort of last minute training. I know that you focus very heavily on video, and you are a real believer in deploying learning management systems. Can you talk at all about any particular models or approaches that you see evolving or things you're looking forward to for the future in terms of how learners consume educational content?
Training is definitely changing. I think COVID-19 also played a role in this. Some of the new concepts that we have used in our platform that are more quote new in the training world, like using micro-learning strategy, using smaller chunks of learning units, took on so much quickly in the last couple of months with COVID-19 being present in our society. Because just like having an ERP on the cloud has given a completely different perspective to companies, having training online is now a very accepted and a common means for a lot of the companies. Maybe if COVID-19 had not happened, it would have taken longer time for people to acknowledge the benefits of an LMS system or providing materials through online means to the learners. It definitely accelerated. And the future, I think, will continue to change based on learners' needs. Our audience is changing. We always have to be mindful of who we are teaching to and what we are teaching. One thing is our audience is getting younger, and they are a generation of phones and iPads. They are a generation of Snapchat and TikTok. They are used to utilizing or reviewing information, consuming information in small chunks. They would only like to review things that are relevant to them, and they have no patience for things that are not important to them to be presented to them. So maybe there are a couple more years for this generation to be in the workforce, but ultimately that's the path we need to follow. So our audience is one thing we need to really always consider. And the other thing we have to consider is, what is it that we're trying to teach? In our world, we are trying to teach D365, which is a tool that learners are supposed to use every day to do their job. They are not there to configure D365. They're not there to know why certain decisions were made when implementation was being done. What they need to know is, how am I going to do my job, and how can I utilize D365 to best capabilities to make sure my company's needs are met. So our perspective is very skill based, very usability based, and that makes the training more relevant to the learners and also usable. So I think we keep these two elements in mind, the type of audience that we have and type of learning that we are trying to create, then I think it will push all of the companies into that path. And obviously, the last side of this is monitoring and being able to see what people are doing. It's critical part of this experience, because really, without having that, you're providing a bunch of information to people without knowing if they're actually completing the materials. Are they really gaining the knowledge that you're asking them to do? So we have to do things like creating assessments, surveys, collecting information, how many times learners are logging in, how many courses that they're completing. All of these details give us a sense of if the training materials are being used, and also a sense of the solution being accepted by the organization, can give us tips and ideas about how to make this journey so much better for the learners to go through.
All right. Well, Elif, I don't know, anything else that you've really got your eye on in terms of where the products are going, maybe what your clients are up to these days? I mean, there's a new release wave that's going to start, in a couple months. As always, products are always changing. Anything else you're paying attention to?
I mean, the changing product is a challenge for us because, like you mentioned, our materials are all in video base. So as soon as the product changes, not slightly, but significantly, especially in the look and feel, we want to make sure that training materials are up to date based on the new functionality. So we're really approaching in two ways. One is we're continuously upgrading our existing materials. So we have a team of people that are just doing that, looking into new functionality and taking what we already have and improving into something better. But also we are looking continuously for new parts of D365. And obviously, commerce was a challenge for us. That's why we've worked closely with the Microsoft Commerce team to develop online training for the commerce solution. So that was a step forward for us. Before that, we had continuously added new functional areas to our course pool, like advanced warehouse management or production. The next group that we're right now looking into the project management, time and expense, and potentially folding CE into that, offering. I am seeing a lot of customers also being very interested in the project module more and more. There are definitely customers who are only implementing project module because that's their business, a core business. But I'm also seeing a lot more of traditional D365 customers using the project module within D365 for their projects. Even though they're maybe a retail company or they make furniture or they sell clothing, they are interested in using the project module and the time and expense, especially with the ability to use apps and things like that. So that's kind of like the next step for us to dive into. and get our hands dirty, creating some project-related materials and hopefully make that available for our audience.
And then as you get into that, then you get to look ahead to the next project-related technology, which is project operations, which changes it once again.
No, it is it's a good problem to have.
Sure.
When we embarked into teaching and training in D365, you have to accept that fact. The product is going to change, your audience is going to change. You have to be up to speed on the new technology, new methodology, and you have to improve just like Microsoft is trying to improve. So we accept that, and when you accept it, and then you're just pretty much on the next stage, which is how am I going to make it work? And we've had good success so far. It's obviously a challenge and an investment, but that's what we're willing to do. And that's ultimately what our subscribers are paying for. They're not only paying for subscribing and using the materials at this point of time, but also they're making the investment to be able to use future versions of the training as well.
All right, excellent. Well, I look forward to sort of staying up to date on where some of those developments are and where you end up focusing your attention. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about where you see the commerce solution going, what your experiences have been with it. Like I think I said earlier, I really do think it's one of the most interesting areas of where Microsoft has chosen to invest in their biz apps. And yeah, it looks like it's going to continue to advance and evolve. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Always pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Elif Item once again for joining me today. If you want more information about Elif and her services, go to itembyitem.co. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, j.gumpert@msdynamicsworld.com, or you can follow us on Twitter @msdynamicsworld. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.